You have to start to live from the inside out. What they call this midlife crisis is trying to align those 2 points. So who you are manifests on the outside instead of the inside. And anything that does not fit within an authentic structure is now called into question.
They look successful, they look strong, they look in control. But inside, they're dying.
These coping strategies that I've been using are no longer working for me. I don't feel the same feedback from these things. Go into therapy or do something different. I don't necessarily feel like midlife crisis is the best way to describe some of this because it implies that it has to be a crisis or that it has to fall under this.
This episode uncovers the truth about men who have mastered the performance of masculinity.
Reach out to a trusted guide, a therapist, a life coach, someone to hold your hand and walk you through. You owe it to yourself. This is your life. Dr. John was saying, I can finally live the life I want to live. Somehow I got a permission slip. So go live it.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and today we have a very special episode. It's another one of our roundtable episodes. This month, we've been focusing on midlife crisis. So you're going to hear from a ton of fantastic experts that tackle this issue from different angles. And I'm curious to hear both about their own experiences and what they see with their clients' boots on the ground. So let's start with some introductions. Tamra, do you want to start? Say a little bit about who you are, who you work with.
Absolutely. So my name is Tamra Sattler, and currently I work with couples in Boulder as well as men. So tech founders, scientists, physicists, sort of the Boulder worried well. And I've known Marc for, 10 years, right?
Long time, yeah.
And also teach at Naropa. And so, and also in midlife myself. So this is an extra special, episode relevant to me.
And Jack, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jack Lambert. I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in New York City. I work predominantly with LGBTQ folks and people with substance use disorders, and also do some general psychotherapy as well. And I'm approaching midlife every day, so also something on my mind as well.
It's just the ever-looming specter,
Right. Like, oh, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, when am I going to have that midlife crisis? And then Dr. John King, introduce yourself to the guests.
My doctorate is in turning shit into fertilizer. It's been a habit of mine, my hobby for my whole life. I'm 62. So, you young pups need to get about it. It is the best ever. I would rather be 62 than 22 or 32 or 42. 52 is pretty good. 62 is incredible.
Hell yeah. Welcome to the show. Listeners, you can find content from all of these people on our website, menstherapy.online. They've all written blogs on this topic. So if you want to learn more about them, it's all there. You're going to have a really great show and hear from some real experts during our hour. So let's just start with kind of a basic question, defining our terms, right? So each of your experience, what is a midlife crisis? What do you see from the clients that you talk to? How does that manifest? What does it mean in 2025 to have a midlife crisis?
Well, I think that that's the crux of this, right? Is that if that's even a term that is worth using anymore, especially for us as therapists, if I were to put a button on it as far as symptoms, we might just be looking for something that's adjustment disorder related surrounding age or stage of life concerns. But I would almost leave it there because otherwise the umbrella term for what a midlife crisis could be just is so huge.
Yeah, it definitely is huge. I would say just this morning, I decided for a lot of my clients, a dark night of the soul, including for myself. But because midlife spans so long, 35 to 70, it can kind of meet us at any point. But it seems like there's a big shakeup, and I wrote my blog about a turnaround. So finally, someone looks inside and starts to, not just be external anymore. So dive into the inner landscape.
Yeah, can you say more about the dark night of the soul? Because I know you bring in a lot of Buddhism into your work and spirituality, and all of our listeners might not be familiar with that term. So can you just open that up for them a little bit?
Yeah, so dark night of the soul feels like when the external identity, success, maybe family, friendships, marriage, just is not working the same than it used to. So something is sort of getting jostled, shaken about. And that's usually when a lot of the men will come into my office and say, I just don't feel right, or I'm acting out in this behavior. I'm not sleeping. I'm having dreams. So I think just a really big shakeup that you can't ignore. So something about it you just can't ignore.
For me, it's an alignment issue. Most of our life we're raised to live our life from the outside in. In our 20s, we're told what to do, what to wear, where to go, what to study, what's expected of us culturally, economically, familiarly. And there comes a point where we have to embrace authenticity or acknowledge that we will never actually do it. And so then you have to start to live from the inside out. And so for me, what they call this midlife crisis is actually an alignment of trying to align those 2 points. So who you are manifests on the outside instead of the outside inside. And anything that does not fit within an authentic structure is now called into question. All relationships are on the cards, businesses are on the cards, hobbies, anything that you're spending time, talent, and treasure on is fair game. And so is it a crisis? I think in some ways it is. But I think the crisis is very essential and it's brought along culturally. If you look in any other culture, your identity as a man is something that is crafted at the early age. In the Jewish culture, for example, at the age of 5, you're leaving home and you're going into the field. In the Imbrani culture, I'm an Australian Aboriginal. At the age of 10, you actually go into ceremony as a man. And you know what it is to be a man in those two cultures, for example. Now, in the Western society, there's this massive gap. And you come to a point of going, you know what, I don't know what it is I want, but I don't want this, man. And then I think the questions start.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of questioning, right? Turning inwards, really wondering, okay, how was I programmed growing up? And do I want to keep any of that programming? Do I really want to become myself? Definitely themes of authenticity. So I'm curious, what do you see for men specifically around this? Because I think, we talk about cultural messaging around midlife crisis. I think as men, we get the short end of the stick. It's like, okay, he bought a sports car, maybe he got divorced and dated somebody younger, maybe he got into guns or something, right? I mean, it's these very surface level, often very adolescent things, but I hear each of you, and I see the same thing in my work. It's a much, much deeper thing. It really shakes a man down to his core. And like you're saying, Dr. King, force him to question everything. So I'm curious for men specifically, how do you see this manifesting and how can they start to navigate it?
I think there are a lot of things imposed upon men. A lot we take on ourselves. Some are cultural norms and tropes. And I don't think any man doesn't mind carrying those things. We are, protectors, directors, correctors. That's by our very nature who we are. Where the disconnect comes is when you've got these societal messages that are conflicting with this inner. This inner, I know who I am. There is a sense, I know who I am. I am this sort of person. This is what a man is. If you peel it back with guys, they'll get to a very common core. And then there's these societal tropes that says that all those things that you value and you see yourself are not valued and are rubbish. And it really comes, I think most of the crisis comes where a guy goes, you know what, screw you. This thing in here is real. And I got married to the love of my life and I'm not going to put up with a roommate. I'm not going to be disrespected in my home. Men can do without love. They can't do without respect. And a lot of the guys I see that come to crisis, they go, you know what, woman, I've fed these kids. I've fed you. I've provided for you for this. And I can't even get a little respect when I come home. You don't want to sleep with me, I get it, but you disrespect me, so I'm done. And they can't just say I'm done. They've got to come up with an excuse to be I done. All men will, more often than not, they'll have an affair to try and save the marriage. Women will have an affair to destroy the marriage. So they'll go out and do this list of things to try and protect something that they're not prepared to confront it internally or confront it externally.
It's tricky to paint with such a generalized brush when we really have to talk about, like, to the extent that men identify as like respect, that something that they need in the relationship, or whatever they're not getting in a relationship, or maybe they're not in a relationship. So I think it really comes down to like all the things, Marc, that you mentioned, like the stereotypical sports car, or the, dating a younger person, or any of those things. Like those are, the symptoms, right? Those are the things that like are happening on the external. But if the internal is really like, I'm realizing I'm not getting a lot of respect, or whatever that might be, I would say it's probably looking more like depression, anxiety, like some of these classic things. Those would be the signs maybe to look out for. Because if we're getting to the point where we're already kind of having this explosive reaction, then I think we're beyond the point of the warning signs. Now we're in, oh, this is the crisis. If it's something acute and needing to be addressed in the immediate, then we've missed maybe some of the prodronal, like, I'm unhappy, or the things that I like to do aren't bringing me joy, or I'm anxious about work, career, relationship, and I'm going to take it out in the following ways.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what both of you are saying, or maybe a theme that I'm hearing. So an attempt to go external, and that doesn't quite satisfy, or blows up, or maybe is not seen through. And I'm a female, obviously, but not obviously, but I am a female. And so they seem to come to me almost as if my wish is that they could talk to maybe their wife or their buddy, or maybe even someone in the community, but they're coming to me saying, almost to be met, something doesn't feel right. This isn't working anymore. I have a lot of successful clients in Boulder, but I don't want to be successful anymore. It's almost like, please tell me what to do. And so kind of through like the joining, then we start to do, like, I've done life narratives. I've done lots of investigation of feelings and doing of like what's actually happening. And it's a longer process. It's definitely not a quick one. But I'm thinking of a man that I've worked with probably for about 5 years, and absolutely so sweet. So just a full meeting. I guess I'll leave it there.
Well, I think that's an interesting point too, right? Is that it takes time, I think, a lot of the time, because it's not, if you're at the crisis point, that's when we're talking about, okay, we need an acute solution, but it takes time to unpack some of these things. So that's why maybe in these early stages, when it's trouble sleeping, or like I mentioned, like lack of interest in things that you enjoy doing, or Tamra, you saying like, oh, these coping strategies that I've been using are no longer working for me. I don't feel the same feedback from these things. Then that's a time to, of course, I'm going to say go into therapy or do something different, whatever it might be. But if you can catch it within that time, maybe that's why, I don't necessarily feel like midlife crisis is the best way to describe some of this, because it implies that it has to be a crisis, or that it has to kind of fall under this, which I don't necessarily think it needs to, because I've seen varied ages of people come in with what we might describe as a midlife crisis, and it doesn't always need to be an acute solution focused thing.
I work with a lot of nice guys, and if you listen to the show, you're very familiar with that topic, but the idea of this mask that a lot of men wear, I think you're all talking about that. That's the external piece, right? Like, you got to be a provider, you got to make X amount of money, you have to, you got to get married, you got to have a good job. It's like all these like status markers that I know a lot of men are pushed into. And when this midlife crisis or midlife period, Jack, to your point, hits, I think guys start questioning that. They start questioning, like, did I really want any of that? Or was there a me in when I was a child that I've left behind? Is there a part of me that I had to cut off in order to conform? So I'm curious if you all could speak to how you see all those external pressures impacting the modern man. Because I think, the amount of money you have to make has only gone up, right? Like the amount of status, now you're on social media, it only is more, right? You got to be jacked, you have to be rich, you have to, have a wonderful partner. Like it's all these things. And I just see it really crushing guys. So I'm curious from your perspective, how do you see, we'll call it the role of culture, role of social media, the role of external expectations? Like what is that weight that many men feel?
I think you described it. I think that was great, Mark. Like that's exactly it, right? Like these are all the pressures. And from men specifically, I guess from my part, I see body image, job, financial, owning property, whatever these things might be. And the perception, that's always the biggest part, is the perception that everyone around me has this figured out. They're already doing this. They're beyond me. They're in the best relationship. They have the best job. They're financially set up. Even when, if we really look at that data-wise, they're like, well, there are some holes here and there, but it doesn't matter for the way that they feel. They perceive it. Everything external is so far beyond me and I'm behind.
Yeah, and it's just, they seem so lonely. Like, where are the male friends? Where is their wife? Where is their wife's support? And I'm not saying that, anyone is at fault, but where is everyone? Why am I the only person that they're talking to about all of this? Yeah, it just feels like crushing. Sometimes when I see them, and even in couples, they're not only crushed, and then they're like waking up to what's happened for the 30 years that they've worked and they've raised their children.
And I wonder if that has something to do with just the way that men are socialized, right? Like there's not a lot of discourse, a lot more now. I guess I'll give that, concedement. But there's a lot of, or a lack rather, of discussion about men making friends or what it means like to feel alone in a relationship or, going out of your way to make these connections and why. It's not just to go have a drink with the buddies, it's beyond that, but we don't want to get into the mushiness of, no, we crave social connection. It's good. It's bonding. It's all of these things. Like, again, in the therapy space, maybe you're talking about that, or even better in group therapy or, these, excursions. But I have to wonder if that's just because men let it get to a crisis because they don't feel comfortable opening up about being lonely or feeling disconnected.
From experience, is that it's a little bit of a uniquely American phenomenon. American men are far more lonely than my experience in Australia or in Europe, even in Asian cultures. Women do things face to face, men do things side by side. So women want to sit around and talk, men don't. Men want to be engaged in an activity. Doesn't matter if it's watching the football, fixing something, building something, walking somewhere. So when we want to have a group therapy or a session with guys and we're expecting them to sit around and talk about feelings, it's not going to happen. But if you get a bunch of guys and they go on a bushwalk or a retreat, or they go hunting, fishing, building something, gardening together, mowing a lawn, painting someone's house, there's these opportunities where they can be actively building, because that's the nature of men. We're builders, we are tamers, we want to do that. When there's these shoulder-to-shoulder opportunities to share things. Now, in a culture where we pit each other against each other as providers in a competitive space, sales or whatever it is, in a work environment, and we're not in harmony working together, then we take it outside of that and we put all these tropes of time spent at work, 12, 18 hours, and we go home, and we're in a space where it's purely a communication on a face-to-face level. Add kids into it, where there's also a level of taking from. Add on top of there that men aren't allowed anymore to have their own spaces, have their own conversations. And the whole concept of men having friends is that they're going to go off and sit around the bar and talk lewdly with each other, which from experience, I've been sitting in bars with men for 60 years and it is very rarely the case. They actually spend more time talking about their wives and their kids than some sort of, sexual escapade. So I think there's a whole series of things. And Jack, to your point, there has to be a taking of responsibility. Is okay, I am going to develop a level of relationships. To be a friend, you've got to have a friend. But I think as therapists or people involved in coaching the space, it's like, okay, we can get together in a group session online or whatever, but even online is, I think, adverse to the nature of men. They will sit and be passive in that where they're not engaged. But seeing some of the things you do, like retreats, you go away, you're engaged, even if it's playing frisbee or whatever it is, there's this chance for men to put themselves in an environment where relationships are a potential outcome from it.
I was just going to say, even for men, John, to your point of men who do feel comfortable having face-to-face and don't feel, as comfortable maybe in the side-to-side dynamic, they still can experience things like midlife crises too. So I think it's important to note the social aspect is a huge one, and especially now because everything is moving towards, look at us now, right? We're virtual in this even, if things are moving towards that, it's beyond just the social aspect and also about, hormones, about, relationships close to home, about how you perceive yourself, or, Mark, as you were saying in the beginning, the identity aspect of all of this as well. So even if you do have that, there are other things to look to. Maybe if you say like, oh, I feel fine, I feel socially connected really well, all these things, I yet somehow still feel alone and isolated by, how I feel. It's a good note to make, because if the idea is, oh, if I can just socially connect, then I can get out of this, it might be a little bit more complicated than that. But on the other side, it's also saying, even if you're not socially connected, it doesn't mean that you're going to fall into a midlife crisis. There are other ways that this can kind of crop up in your life.
Yeah. Well, so I want to see what you guys think about the idea of parts that are left behind in childhood or in adolescence. I think a lot of the men I talk to that are in this period feel like they had to grow up too fast, or they had to perform, and they lost themselves. So I'm curious, from your experience, maybe you have any stories from clients or people in your communities. What is something that guys leave behind that they need to go back and reclaim?
So one client I'm thinking about was had incest with a family member, and he had to go back and to kind of step back in and do some deep trauma work. And that event was really keeping him from, a future partner. He did some medicine work. And so something like that can also be revisited.
Yeah, often, yeah. I'm sure a lot of talk about trauma, right? But to certainly open that door too, that if these wounds are not healed, I find that men or people in general, right, will conform, or they will do these patterns that are all protective of never feeling that bad again, right? Or never being in a situation where, X, Y, and Z happened. And there's a fakeness to that, because it's not progressive. It's not built on growth. It's not built on values. It's not built on joy. It's all protection and walls. And if men are living in that protected, defensive state all the time, then of course, you can only do that for so long before, kind of like you're saying, Tamra, it just bottoms out and you can't ignore it, right? It just falls apart because it is very fragile. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show.
I had a client who I saw in his 60s, but when we were talking about childhood, he was just very classically depressed, and his expression of it was through anger. And he saw, his family, very wealthy, was able to send him to all these anger management people and all these therapists and all these groups. And he finally got his anger under control through drinking. And, when I met him, he was very well established, again, very wealthy, successful, anything on paper that anyone would kind of point to and say, this is someone who truly has no reason, again, putting in quotes, to have a midlife crisis. But the drinking wasn't working for him anymore. He had reached a point now where it was unsustainable. And we really just talked a lot about, if I had found a way for people to listen to me and actually hear that I was depressed and that anger was the only way for me to really talk about this, if someone had just asked me a little bit more than just assuming that I was just an angry kid and then an angry teen and an angry young adult, then maybe, I could have refound, or refound myself, I guess, in some of those ways. So for a lot of this, it wasn't even talking about, once we had the drinking to a point that was a little bit more under control, a lot of it was just talking about in the past, I did not feel heard, listened to, again, could be in a room full of people, but felt very alone. And that's, for a teen or a young adult, that's extremely impactful, and you carry that into your midlife no matter what.
I was abused from 4 to 16, trafficked by the women who raised me, and a bunch of guys as well, so I was an equal opportunity. And what that level of trauma does is it puts you immediately into a defensive mode where you're fighting for survival. Now, fighting for survival is something you're supposed to do as an adult. As a man, you're supposed to be able to fight for survival to protect yourself and those around you. When it starts at 4 and you're having to fight for survival all the way through, you're engaging a series of things before their time, and things aren't allowed to develop. So in my own recovery process, it was asking myself questions of myself, like, what did I really like? Like, sexually, what did I like at the base level? Because I'd been trained to satisfy women, and I've been trained to engage in this series of things. So your sexuality is ruptured and trained, homosexually, heterosexually, the whole way round. So trained to do these things. So your sexuality is ruptured, which is, a key part of identity formation during those years. So with the rupturing of that, everything else gets ruptured as well. And it wasn't until probably just 2 years ago, I felt I had my feet under me enough, and I reconnected with my family in Australia. I'm an Australian Aboriginal and Imbrani man. And there's a practice we do where we sit on the ground face to face, and there's a whole series of cultural things we go through. But it was a practice of sitting with oneself. And I remember when I went from John 1.0 to John 2.0, I had to get very comfortable with John 2.0. I had John to get him, is how my internal marketing department branded it. But John 2.0 was totally different, even in what he liked or had the capacity to do, than John 1.0. So there came a point at 45 when I had recall, I had to make a decision to like this new John 2.0. And a lot of the anger, the drinking, the sexual risky behavior that comes out of a trauma response, a lot of that is because you're not comfortable with who you are. So again, authenticity to me in my journey has been very, very important. And when you can sit with yourself and you allow those scars of the past to turn into medals of honor, there comes this sense of settling. And I think a lot of the rage we hear and the acting out is because these men haven't been ever allowed to love themselves. They don't know what it is like to sit with themselves and actually enjoy their own company. A man at peace is a man in silence. And if a man can sit at peace with himself and in silence with himself, then he's going to be at peace with the rest of the world. That's been my experience anyway.
I think there's a similar aspect that comes from, and again, I'll speak specifically to men having this experience, but like men who come out later in life, it's not necessarily to do with trauma. Maybe they just didn't feel comfortable coming out or, et cetera, but there is this idea of either or both loss of there's so much time that I feel like I've lost because I didn't come out until now, or this idea, John, that you're talking about too, of just like, I don't know if I like this part of me or this version of me or this 2.0, whatever you want to call it, and that there has to be some sort of integration of those two parts together. And in the meantime, there can be acting out or depression or anxiety, substance use, again, these things that we might call within the midlife crisis umbrella. But that is a huge part of this as well. Is it can even just come down to my body is changing and I need to love this new body that I'm in, or my career is shifting. I need to love myself in this new career. We could even break it down that much. But from the gay men that I see coming out later in life, I'd say that's a huge part of it, is just it feels like there is a 2.0 version that needs to be accepted or integrated. And that's, no matter how much you love yourself or how much you accept yourself, there can be a challenge with that because you're just a social being and you are going to compare yourself to the world around you. So a lot of that is knitting maybe what I felt I lost in my childhood, or what I felt, couldn't be there, and trying to process it now, rather than what I see a lot of guys doing at that point, which is trying to act out in a way that, we might call regression, to live that life of an 18-year-old or a 20-something who's, new to the city or new to a place. Like, it can be somewhat damaging to do that as a 40 or 50-year-old, especially when we talk about substances or, certain type of actions like that. And I'm sure, Tamra, you see that with couples as well, even of just, I'm having trouble accepting the new part of my life, and I'm going to put this on you as my partner to say why, I'm unhappy.
Yeah, I think Jack and Dr. King are talking about a really important point. That's for my next question, right? It's this idea, what I'm hearing in what you're saying, it's like integrate the past, right? Heal the trauma, obviously way easier said than done, figure out who you were. But then there is this step of what is the future? Because I agree, Jack, completely with what you're saying. And I see that as a very common pitfall, is men trying to go back to being in their early 20s or in their teenage years and trying to go back to where their life was simpler, less responsibility, more playfulness. And it's like, good, have those things. But you're also like 50, and we talk a lot in men's work about this coming of age, right? This like going from a boy to a man. But what's not talked about, and something that I hope to one day provide, right now I'm definitely not qualified, but this idea of going from a man to an elder, going to that next level, that next phase of human development. And I do think it requires a different mindset, a different set of skills, a different value structure. So I'm curious what you all think about what that, maybe 2.0, maybe even 3.0 version looks like, and what are some of the things that a man needs to learn and practice and lean into in order to truly take his seat as an elder in his community or in his family.
Something that Dr. John said, something about the simplicity and the authenticity. So one of my clients went back to study pure math after being sort of a computer executive founder. And I just thought that was so beautiful. But there's, I'm thinking of a few of them. There's just this, maybe what I see as a little boy desire, yeah, you can do this now. You have the resources, your family's fine, or you can spend a day at the golf course, or you can go do, workshops for your favorite poet. You're allowed to do these things. Or you can younger men. I have a gay client who's is it okay that I like younger men? Well, let's explore it. But yes. So I just find, and in my own midlife, a lot of quiet, a lot of simplicity. It's I'm becoming an elder, but almost going back to the simplest of things, which is it's interesting when you're in it. Yeah, you don't really need much.
And it's cultural too, because there's a fear, I think, that we have in this culture around aging. There's industries built around preventing aging. There's so much discourse around, that it is something to be prevented. And I think that's almost why the midlife crisis feels inevitable, even though it's not. There is an idea maybe of, if you can get from 1.0 to 2.0 or wherever you are in your life with, perhaps you've gone through traumas where you're on 6.0 at this point, because of what you've experienced, that there's knowledge and ability that you gain through years of experience where you could be 40 and be prepared to be 60, or you could be 60 and prepared to be 80 because you know what it takes to go through these transitions. You might not know exactly what the transitions are, but you have the skills and you've developed coping strategies that are flexible and resilient throughout these times. So while I like Mark, like you said, I can't speak about, the skills of being an elder. I wouldn't speak on that. I could speak to, well, what has worked thus far in helping you transition through difficult periods? And is there a way to build upon what already exists and maybe look for other new things? But I do think it's kind of this capacity to say, what have you been doing that's worked? Because you didn't get here on luck. you've been doing something that is authentic and internal and not just about the external world. It's not just about your partner or your kids or your job. You're doing something and really kind of teasing out what that is and building upon that for the future.
So in Brani culture, I'm a Warramunga man from the Red Centre. So Mbrani is the term. We don't use the term Aboriginal. We use the term Mbrani. It's actually a broad-based term. So there's a couple of key points. At 10, you're initiated as a man. You now have to leave your mother's care, and you now go into the care of your uncles and your fathers and your elder brothers. You have to cook for yourself, clean for yourself, hunt for yourself. Everything happens that way. Then there's this period of time as a young man at the age of 10, you then go up to this next stage, which is probably 30 or 40 years away, where you come in I'm a Gulungu in my tribe. I'm responsible for the law and the stories of my people. So you get to a point where you now have a role in the tribe, and that role is to reinvest back into the young boys up to 10, and then to everybody else that's coming through. And that is the role of an elder. You go back and reinvest. So I was talking to a mate the other day, and he said, and this guy is a top tier guy. I mean, he's done his Marine, he's SWAT coursed here in Dallas. I mean, he's a bit of a pipe hitter, go get him. He said the biggest thing he fears about getting old, is people no longer being intimidated by him or scared by his ability to be able to defend himself. So there's this sense of I am vulnerable and useless because of his path. But there's also an attitude amongst us that the old are invisible. Elders are invisible. And I think X generation is probably going to change a lot of this conversation. And I'm seeing that start to change now because we're living longer and we're just impolite. And so we're just not going to bow out and die slowly. But there's this sense that now as an elder, at some point you have to authenticity, live from the inside out. I understand I'm in a role and place in life where part of my roles is to give, and I have to find a place to put that. What will I do? What will I give back? Now, that's an elder's mindset, not a consumer's mindset. And that's part of this growing up attitude we've been talking about, is I'm graduating from boyhood into manhood. Boyhood is I enjoy what's mine. Manhood is I'm providing for what's mine. And elder is I'm preparing those that are now mine. So we're reaching backwards and we're saying, okay, you're coming through, young son. I'm going to teach you as a 10-year-old. Now I'm going to coach you as a man through marriage. And then I'm going to walk off myself. I'm going to go walk about myself into the sunset. And I've left behind that legacy. For us, we've defined legacy financially. We've defined it around activity. We don't ever see a legacy as the impartation of a lifetime of knowledge, an impartation of a lifetime of messes. We want to talk about our victories, but very rarely are we prepared to have honest conversations about the reason I am this wise is I fucked up more than you. So here I am, and I'm just hoping that you don't have to do the same thing.
And a lot of the times that's communicated through punishment, right? It's not the explanation of I'm doing this because I was exactly where you are. It's out of, well, don't do this, don't do those things. And I think that that's a lot of the times why these like younger folks shut down when they try to, perceive that someone else is coming after them or coming after what they represent. But it is true that there is this aspect of, there is such knowledge and such wisdom that's gained in elder years, but from the elder folks that I know, they don't like being described in that way all the time because they're like, it's not that I'm some wellspring of knowledge. I still feel young, or I feel like I want to be part of these things. And so I do think it's kind of balancing, how do you feel about being, you do have knowledge. You do have these things. You do have things to share, rather than just feeling like, oh, I'm approaching, this end of my life. I think that maybe is the term that I hear a lot, is that I'm reaching the end, rather than saying this is a new phase. I get to really embrace this aspect of myself. So maybe even the discourse about it changing to what feels important to you about being this age or being an elder, or however you want to describe it for yourself, because I do think that that's an important aspect of this. What feels important about that, and how do you show it? And who listens to you when you show it? Who sees that part of you? Because a lot of the times it maybe begins as it's just us as the therapist. seeing this or hearing about this. And then it's about kind of saying, well, how do you know who else is safe to share that part of you with? I think it's nice when you're part of a culture, John, to your point of that there is almost, or not almost, there just is a place for that. There is almost this way of this is how the process goes. But for a lot of us, I think we're in the middle of a shift to saying, let's try to place some more importance on, being an elder, but also understand what that actually means and what that looks like.
What was interesting with that, Jack, is I didn't find out about it till 2 years ago. So in the Australian culture, in Australia, there was this thread of breeding the black out. And it was an Australian policy up until the 70s. So an Indigenous couple, so melanin is recessive gene in the Aboriginals. It's dominant in Africans, recessive. So by the third generation of crossbreeds, half-breeds as we grew up being called, you were blonde-haired and brown-eyed, which was my case. And in my case, I was taken off my Indigenous family and placed with a European family to assimilate and to breed the blackout. That was the aim. And they were the people that trafficked me. So it's a thing called the stolen generation within Australian culture. So I didn't know about this until 2 years ago. So I love what you're talking about, brother, because all I knew is I had an ache. All I knew is that there was a longing, that there was supposed to be a graduation, that I felt more useful in my 60s, understanding that I had been trafficked and abused as a child, that my entire life had lived with this shadow, that I was diagnosed as borderline personality disorder, then fought my way back to CPTSD, nearly took my life several times on a barrel or a bottle. I mean, we're talking and bringing this thing, lost everything. I mean, the whole box and dice when I had recall. And still through it all, I thought all of that was supposed to be for good. But now within our culture, looking at 60 going, well, according to everything in the West, I'm done. Everything I had before me there was no point to any of that pain. My prayer has never been why, but always been turn it around for good. And now I get here and I collide with my culture and I walk in with my brothers as a 10-year-old boy. And I have the pleasure and the privilege of going through this process in a compressed time of 9 months, moving from a child to now being reinstated in a tribe and understanding what my value and purpose is within that nation and tribe. So we're talking about a very small period. So it's not that I didn't have the privilege of growing up into that. I came to learn the value of it and the centering that has done as a man, as a Western man, a white man raised in a European culture, the centering that's done has been shattering to everything that I held true. And so I look at it and I think, okay, so I don't believe this is unique to me. Do I believe in ancestral DNA and a range of those things, ancestor mind? Absolutely. I've just always known that was a thing. But I see it as also something greater in the psyche of men. If you can understand your value, that you're actually graduating into being useful at 60, then I can stop redefining where I've come from and started to celebrate whatever this possibility is going forward.
And that's the future aspect, right? It's about, we get to look forward to the future. It isn't, I'm stuck here.
No.
It's look at all what's available to me, and again, it's not the end. It's, oh, look at this new chapter. And I that sounds so cliche, I guess, to say new chapter, but I think that's
true.
part of it.
It's a reality, brother.
Right. Yeah. And we need language to describe that aspect of it beyond something maybe that feels cliche, because you're right, it is true.
Well, I'm listening to both of you and I'm thinking about my clients and being in the West. We talk a lot about legacy and we don't have a culture that really supports that. I'm hopeful. And they have to go out because they have this ache or this desire, and they have to go out and actually form later in life networks or revisit their, colleges or universities. And that it just hit me that there's not such an easy way to give.
And if we do, we define it like we define so many things. Like if you think about it, the things that are valuable are not the things that you can buy. They're your health, your relationships, your time. And so, but in our culture, we've defined those things that are valuable by what we purchase. So to your point, Tamra, they're going out looking for things to buy to be remembered beyond their death, as opposed to people they can invest in that will tell their stories. And, we paint up and we sit on the ground and we sing songs. We sing songs of our stories, our people, our culture, our friends. And there's something about being remembered in the soul of those people you invest into. And I think maybe there's an opportunity with some of this, so giving some credence to indigenation and see, we're all indigenous from somewhere, but we just don't value that. And we don't understand that our roots and our country and our people call to us. And everyone, I believe, has a longing to reinvest back into something and a someone somewhere.
There's a line from my favorite movie, Moonstruck, that Olympia Dukakis says, and she asks, why do men cheat? And the response that she gets is because they're afraid to die. And, we really talk about death anxiety, in different areas of therapy and things like that, to the extent that it applies to this, or this idea of, I need to leave some sort of legacy. I need to leave some aspect of myself. We do focus on the monetary, the external and things like that, and being able to think about rather what am I leaving, say, like, what am I doing now, because this is what I am in control of rather than what I'm out of control of. It's a shift. It's a subtle shift maybe, but it feels monumental because you're allowing yourself, you're letting yourself, ask for what you want, or like what you want, or fight for what you want, or any of these things. And a lot of us might feel that at a certain age we don't get to do that anymore. Again, I see this in some of my clients who feel like they won't ever stop drinking or using substances, or won't ever be in a relationship that they want to be in. They feel that they've given up on certain aspects of their life. So really recentering and refocusing, like I hear a lot of this is just about being able to come into the here and now and just be able to be, as simple as that sounds. But I guess I can't emphasize enough, if it feels difficult for you, there's a reason for that, because it is difficult to do something so simple, as oxymoronic as that sounds.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is a lot of things. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I guess 2 points. One point is I'm hearing an identity shift. I think, Dr. King, you put it well. I talk about with my guys of like, when you're a boy, it's about you, right? You're a consumer, you're learning, you're soaking things in. When you're a man, it's about your family, chosen family or biological, right? Community, tribe. It's a small group. And for a lot of men, that's the first loss, is they realize it's not about themselves all the time anymore, right? They're part of a smaller group that is trying to, accomplish something as a unit, right? And that could be in career too. It doesn't have to all be family, right? But for a lot of men, it's their family. And then this post-midlife crisis person, it's about the community. It's about the nation. It's about the world, right? It's like the circle gets so much bigger. And it's, hey, what is my imprint? What is my legacy? In Jungian psychotherapy and in mythology, it's this king archetype, right? Like you now have a kingdom and you're a shepherd of that. You're not a tyrant, right? It's not about power and control. It's about really shepherding. And I'm also hearing this distinction between moving forward into that king archetype, into that community nation mindset, into that legacy component, and not just, falling into pleasure, right? Falling into like pure hedonism, or trying to go back, or trying to just like shirk responsibility, right? I'm hearing it's actually embracing and leaning into responsibility instead of just trying to blow your life up. So I'm curious for each of you, that line is so fine, but so dangerous. If you're on the other side of that line, if you're on that hedonistic, self-destructive line, it can ruin your life, right? But if you're on that other line, right, if you're on the line of meaning and kingdom and really having a legacy, it can make your life worth living and really have you die, which is ultimately where it'll go, die with peace and die with power. So I'm curious for each of you, maybe specifically whether you have a client story or an example of an intervention or a question or an activity, something like how do you help men and help your clients figure out what side of the line that they're on when they're coming up through this midlife period?
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online.
One of the things, and I'm glad you mentioned this because I had this thought right after I finished what I was saying, but one of the things that I find helpful, because I'm really telegraphing a lot of, there's so much there, be present, ask for what you want, that there is so much rich opportunity and joy and contentment and yada, yada, yada. There is also an aspect of this that is also allowing yourself to mourn for things that you won't have again or that have passed, and normalizing going through that process, not sitting in purely that, but knowing that you don't have to, for all of those things, being dangerous, being hedonistic, that doesn't have to be the way to quell the grief or the sadness about things that have happened or have passed, that there is something positive about being able to sit with, I am going to miss that, or it does suck that can't happen for me maybe in the same way anymore, and having that be almost a poultice to allow yourself, that Jungian idea of you're walking through this for a reason to get to, more than just grief or passing, that allows you to really sink your teeth into some of the positivity that can exist there.
Yeah, I think the line is really delicate. I'm remembering one client, he liked to visit sex clubs in Thailand, and I just said, and he had a wife, and I said, I'm not going to be able to work with you if you aren't honest with your wife. Like, I just can't, support this. I supported it for a while, and that was almost like, again, the turn inward. He finally got honest with his wife, got honest with himself, primarily with himself, ended up getting divorced. But Jack, something you said, like actually asking for what he needed in his relationship. So it's a fine line, and I want to be there for that tightrope walk. And then at certain points with my own values, my own ethics, it's a real relationship. So I'm going to, be real also.
Probably the most important thing that I've taken away from my journey so far, there's probably 4 things I've established, and this might help speak to helping some guys graduate from where they are. Is the first thing is the foundation is authenticity. Is you have to know who you are, and that's where the work starts. You got to do work on this. Know who you are, and then whether or not your life aligns with it. Most people can't align their life from the inside out because they haven't spent the time on knowing who they are. Even hedonistic behavior, be it alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever, is all an external definition or all an external reference point. It's not an internal drive. If I like to have sex, I like to have sex with my wife. Sex before I got married to Melissa was, I didn't think that love, marriage, and sex could be this good. It's phenomenal. But having never had proper sexual experience to be in a place where I can talk about this, it actually removes it from the hedonistic space and brings it into an intimate and connection space. It brings it into a conversation, because sex is ultimately a conversation between best friends. So I think authenticity is that starting point. And out of there, I discovered that I needed to imagine the future I wanted to inhabit, which is, to your point, Jack, is that what does this future look like? So I know who I am, and I'm asking the questions not based upon what I think other people should tell me, but based upon those things which I hold truth. This is what's important to me. And then I found that gave me permission to set goals according to that. So new man, a new understanding of who this man was, a new idea of the future for this man, and then set goals according to that. So now I'm inside and I'm working out and I'm working backwards now. And then the Finnish word susu is, the white-knuckled courage in the face of insurmountable odds, relentless and resiliency to see that through. And for me, those those things they all sort of stack as very simple 4 truths that I've found not only in my own life, but in my practice. If I can get people they love the idea of living Sasu and just going for it. But then you got to wind it back and say, hey, brother, we need to sit on the ground just a little bit here because, you're shagging around on your missus. Now, number one, we need to have a conversation. If you want to go shagging around on your missus, own the fact that you're shagging around on your missus and there's consequences. So don't come whining to me when she finds out or you end up getting caught or end up with a clap. Own that stuff. Now, if you're going to shag around on your missus, why are you shagging around on your missus? Well, I'm not getting enough at home. Well, you need to have a conversation with the missus. So whose fault is that? Yours or all? Well, I find it difficult. Well, you need to do these conversations. And so then you start to unpack that. For me, it all ultimately comes back to the question of authenticity. So who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And if you sit with that long enough, it's either really scary or really fun.
I like that this question, like for all of us, it pulls for both, like there's this therapist side of us and then there's this personal side of us that gets exactly where the client is coming from and is, faced maybe, if not something similar, that feeling or that idea of there is a line. And part of this is what's difficult about being a therapist, which is you're not there to parent necessarily and say, but don't cross that line, be careful. Like it is sometimes about the client's going to cross the line and they're going to do what they want. And, we're going to sit with that. And, these are the consequences and this is what happens. And look at all of these things. And that can be challenging at times when you can sit there and say, there's all of this available, there's this kingdom available to you, so you're actively blowing up your life. These are two contradicting thoughts, then you want both of them. It's very difficult to just sit there and say, well, this is what you've done. I could, and Tamra, I know you're saying like, at some point you have to set boundaries of just like, this is the behavior that I will allow and find like clinically okay to work with. And sometimes I have to set a boundary and say, this is no longer, a healthy space. But it's challenging, especially, and I'll speak for me personally, I'm in my 30s. I don't feel that I can necessarily say to a client, and, I certainly wouldn't, but if you do this, you're going to ruin your life. I don't know. I don't have that life experience, but I certainly know if someone's saying, I'm having all these risky sexual experiences, I'm cheating on my partner over and over and over again, have been a lot of consequences. There has to be part of this conversation of how much of you authentically identifies as this hedonistic lifestyle and how much of this is a reaction to fearing if you weren't to do that, who you would be, that it would inevitably change you. So again, that thin line, but there's a way to look at both of those things and not feel like you're either reining in your client or crossing a boundary, but also being aware that there are certain behaviors that do cross a line, just either safety-wise or with your own, clinical comfort.
Yeah. I love the who am I? Like, sitting with these people, like, who are you? Are you, like you were just saying, Jeff, like, are you this person to go to the sex club? Great. But who are you really? Who do you want to be? And yeah, that true self with the false self, finally reckoning that. And that's the most beautiful work that for me personally, helping someone stand in who they really are. I mean, there's no greater gift than to be who you are.
It's so rewarding. Like that's one of my favorite parts about this work as well, but so interesting that we're having this conversation around midlife crises when, the last podcast I was personally on was the teens podcast, and it was a very similar conversation about how difficult that is and how it does take years and it does shift, and it's so dependent on so many external factors sometimes of wanting to fit in and wanting to feel seen or heard, that we have this same conversation when we talk about midlife, that there sometimes is, that 2.0 or that 3.0 that we're talking about. Like there is this shifting of identity that can happen and doesn't always have to be a crisis, but it happens.
Well, as our kind of final question here, I'm curious if our listeners are feeling inspired by the conversation. I know I am. What is one, or maybe a couple, if can't limit yourself to one thing that they can do immediately, whether that is a book recommendation, it is a spiritual practice, it is a question that they can write or meditate on, journal about. What is something that they can do right after listening to this that can put some of what we've been talking about directly into action for them and help move the needle even a little bit?
Men's therapy podcast offer. I've got a program called the Phoenix Collective. It's an online program for mental health and performance. And we're actually just starting a brand new series called Derailed, Why Smart People Do Dumb Shit. So for your people, anyone that's here, if they reach out to me, the value of that is $450. I'll gift it to them for free. And they can download, they can go through it for the 4 weeks, 5 weeks that we're running the course. I think it's the best thing I can give them, because that's all I do this whole next 4-week, 5-week program is we're unpacking the whole issue of alignment. And you've been very good to me, Mark. I like your forum. I like what you guys are doing, and I want to support it. So my gift for you. So 10 people turn up, there's $4.5 grand worth of investment. 1,000 people for it, that's a lot of money invested in you guys. So guys, take it. If you want it, it's yours. If you're not, whatever. So there you go. I'll drop it in the chat, or I'll send you an email on it or a text, brother, and I'll welcome them on.
Yeah. Send it in an email. We'll put it in the show notes. So listeners, you can log in and check that stuff out.
Hard to follow that because I don't have anything as monumental to offer. But one thing that I do think can be a useful, practice, or something that you could literally do right after turning this off or right this moment, is, write down, if you did say, like, what is my most authentic self right now? What is that part of me want? And what would I maybe be scared or not want to ask either my partner or from myself or from life, to really write down what that would be and have that be something to either meditate on or bring up to your therapist or bring up to your partner, or even just kind of sit with yourself on it. There might be that feeling of, oh, there is a discrepancy in what I want my authentic self to be and what I maybe fear, about getting there. So writing that down can be a helpful exercise.
I would say look for a trusted guide, companion, and even, get in a men's group. So many men have benefited so much by a men's group, getting together in a room. And if you're too afraid for that right at the beginning, reach out to a trusted guide, a therapist, a life coach, someone to hold your hand and walk you through. You owe it to yourself. This is your life. This is a life well lived, and continue. I'm almost going to be 60, and wow, there's such permission to really live, kind of like Dr. John was saying, I can finally live the life I want to live. Like somehow I got a permission slip. So go live it. We've got, one time around that we know of. So reach out to Marc's group, Men's Therapy.
Yeah, exact. Good call, Tamra. Reach out to the group. Reach out to the conversation. Join the Slack group.
Yeah.
Yeah, get a part of the community. I mean, there's so much stuff there. Like, of course, we offer it, Men's Therapy Online. Dr. King, you offer it. I know Jack and Tamra, you have your own practices, right? It's like there's so much stuff, and we are ready to chat with you about this. We're ready to help guide you through it, ready to connect you with other men, other people that are going through the exact same thing, different flavor, but same feeling. There's a lot out there, but you have to take that first step. You have to take that first step. And once you're there, we're here with open arms. So as we're ending, for each of you, any final thoughts, maybe something we didn't cover that you just want to talk about, and where can people find you, your practices, your communities, your products? Where can they find you online if they want to learn more about what you do out there?
I guess I'll say, use us as an example. We're 4 clinicians who have some overlap in who we see, but we do have distinct specialties, and we all have folks who experience a version of midlife crisis or midlife, concern. There is someone for you specifically. Even if you feel like, oh, out of these 4 people, I don't even know who I would want to go to, like, always be on the lookout, because it does exist across people and across cultures and across time, all of these things. So do the research, try different people out. You don't ever have to be stuck in one coping strategy. You can always try other things. That's the whole point of all this access that we have now to all of this care. My website is jacklambert.lmhc.org. As Marc said, all of my blog posts have all of my information as well. And I'm happy to do free consultations with folks. Feel free to go to the website and hit me up.
Perfect. Yeah. Mine is Tamra, Tamra, Sattler, Sattler.net. If I don't work for you, I will find you someone that does, a person or a group or a retreat or something.
drjohnking.com, drjohnaking.com, as opposed to like doctor. So, or phoenixcollective.app, or ask Marc, or see you in the chat on Slack.
Yeah, check all their stuff out. All those links will be in the show notes. Again, everything is on their blog. Every one of these people has written a blog for us. All their links are there as well. And as you know, Men's Therapy Podcast is part of Men's Therapy Online. So all of our stuff is at menstherapy.online. We got, tons of podcast episodes, a bunch of blogs. Again, many are written by these fine folks here. We do individual, couples, and groups. We also have retreats. We do it all. So we're the hub for men's mental health online, menstherapy.online. And similar to Tamra, we offer a concierge service free of charge. If you don't want to work with us or don't think we fit, we will find you somebody locally online. We don't get any commission for that. We just want to help men connect with mental health providers and really take their next chapter, whether it's midlife, whether it's adulthood, whether it's recovering from trauma, substance abuse, whatever it is, take that next chapter in stride and become the best man that you can be. So thank you so much for tuning in. Guests, thank you for taking the time and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience, and your vulnerability on this show. And listeners, we will see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.